Greenland left the European Union. They mostly produce fish.
No,
hang on, no, that's my point. That is exactly my point. They mostly produce fish. There are 60,000 people. It took them 3 years to negotiate their exit, right? We'd have to negotiate our exit, negotiate our trading arrangements with the European Union, and negotiate 53 other trade agreements. In my view, this would take a decade. Do we want a decade of uncertainty? Do our businesses want a decade of uncertainty?
Have the same deals for 2 years. You would activate Article 50, it would take 2 years, we'd still be in the EU, we'd have some time to negotiate.
Okay, you activate Article 50.
You're going to activate that immediately. You're going to activate that immediately?
That is what, if British people vote to leave, that's what we should do.
On the 28th of June, you will activate it at the European Council.
That's what we have to do. What would happen next? You have 2 years to negotiate. At the end of those 2 years, you are out, and you have to operate under World Trade Organization rules. And I want people to understand what that means. That means 10% tariffs on the cars that we sell to Europe. It means tariffs on the clothes we sell. It means potentially tariffs on the food that we sell. It would hammer our farmers. It would hammer jobs. It is, as the head of the World Trade Organization himself said, a disastrous outcome for Britain. And the reason why these economic arguments are so important is I think if we've learned anything over the last 6 years, if you don't have a strong economy, you can't have the health service that you want, you can't have the schools that you need, you can't have the public services you want. And this would be an act of economic self-harm of the United Kingdom doing it to ourselves.
We will still trade, and in your analyses, you have assumed the absolute worst possible scenarios.
No, I haven't.
And you know that many of these things... The Treasury Select Committee has said that you, the government, has misrepresented this £4,300 claim about families. Will you withdraw it?
I think you're wrong about that. The worst outcome is the one we were just discussing, where you go to World Trade Organization rules and you pay these tariffs.
Well, that's £6,000.
The one that we were putting in that document was the best trade deal that the European Union has done so far with another country, which was with Canada, right? It took 7 years to negotiate, and it still isn't complete. Now, Canada is 3,000 miles from the European Union. We are 20 miles from the European continent. We need a trade deal very badly, and we don't need a Canada trade deal. It doesn't cover... Yeah, but
we'll inherit many of the same deals.
You're sounding a bit like the Brexit campaign, who just say, look, it's all going to be fine.
I need to put these questions to you, Prime Minister. But no, you have a number that your Treasury has claimed, that the Treasury Select Committee has said, and I'm going to quote this now, to persist with this claim would be to misrepresent the Treasury's own work. This is really important, because the way that you personally have framed the 4,300 claim means that many people on average household income of 45,000 think they're going to lose £4,000. They're not going to lose £4,000, are they? Can you clarify that?
What that figure is the loss to the economy divided by the number of households in our country. Look, if our country is poorer, then our households are going to be poorer. And what this means is fewer jobs. It means lower wages. It means less incomes. Those are the things that we'll be inflicting on ourselves if we were to vote to leave. Now, I've talked about the trade effect. That's because you're no longer part of the single market.
I want to get on with this economic...
Okay, I've got to make one more point. We talked about the uncertainty effect. There's also, of course, the shock effect. Because people expect the country to be poorer by leaving, the shock of leaving, according to the Governor of the Bank of England, according to 9 out of 10 economists, is a severe shock that sees the pound fall, prices rise, and a recession in our economy.
Predicting a pound fall. I've never heard that. I've covered economics for 10, 15 years. Why are you comfortable with talking about sterling?
You can see it in the course of this campaign, when a good poll comes out for Brexit, the pound tends to fall.
Things go up or down. We can cope with movements in sterling. We're a strong nation. What are you saying?
Again, it all sounds so glib, just saying it's all going to be fine. If the pound falls, as economists forecast it would, that means the prices that we pay in our shops will be higher.
It's fallen this amount before, and we've stood up as a nation and coped with it.
But prices will be higher for people to pay in their weekly shop. That's what, that is the point. There's a shock effect, there's an uncertainty effect.
Well, the shock effect is
a trade effect.
On the British public, on grannies. You were saying a vote to leave would threaten dignity in retirement. Even Jeremy Corbyn, who's on your side, is criticising myth-making and prophecies of doom.
But even if you don't want to believe the Treasury, you've got the 9 out of 10 economists, you've got the International Monetary Fund...
We know this.
You've got the Bank...
We've heard this
keep saying we know this. It's a glib... Right. It'd be interesting if it was 1 or 2 organisations were worried about leaving, but the fact is every international organisation with any standing all say the same thing about the economic...
Your scaremongering does not stop at the economy, does it? What comes first, World War III or the global Brexit recession?
Read my speech. The words World War III never, never
a risk to
uttered my
peace and
lips.
stability
Yes.
on our continent, serried rows of white headstones. How do you get from a vote to Brexit in 3 weeks' time to serried rows of white headstones?
Well,
can you explain the steps in
yes,
between?
let me tell you exactly. Right, on our continent, in the last century, twice we had an enormous bloodbath between our nations. Europe's... Hang on, in the past. Again, can we be so confident that we've solved all of Europe's problems and all of Europe's tensions?
I can be confident we're not going to invade France and France is not going to invade us.
Again, you're being completely glib about it, right? Look, I sit round the European Council table. It can be immensely frustrating, but when you're there, you never forget that 70 years ago, these countries were fighting each other. I don't think we should take that for granted. Now, frankly, NATO has done the most to keep the peace in Europe, but the European Union has been a way of getting countries that used to fight each other to talk to each other.
Well, perhaps
and I don't think... No, but I think you are being incredibly glib about this. I think... Does Europe help to create dialogue
You've made
in Europe?
Claims.
Yes, it does.
No, I didn't. I never. Perhaps you're the one that should be fighting about the disastrous party management.
Find me the bit of the speech that mentions World War III.
You said...
You won't find it. Come on.
You said serried rows of white headstones.
Well, there are serried rows of white headstones in Europe because twice in a century Europe went to war, and on both occasions Britain had to go and be part of that conflict, and we paid a very, very heavy price.
I've heard you this evening, and let me make a suggestion that you failed to hit that migration target. You failed to get a deal that would allow you to meet this migration target. You failed to, in your party management too. So you've reached for a classic Cameron fear campaign. It worked in the Scottish referendum. It worked in the general election campaign when you used the Scots to scare the English. And you're trying it again, but this time it's not working.
I just don't accept that because it's not...
Russia invaded the Crimea. Then they started to foment trouble in the eastern Ukraine. The only organisation that could deal with that wasn't NATO, which is the cornerstone of our defence, but was the European Union, which we were able to lead into applying sanctions against Russia, legally binding sanctions against trade with Russia to ensure that Russia paid a price for that, learned that it can't behave like that, and can't ignore the West. So the European Union and NATO are both part of our collective security of the West, and we would undoubtedly be in a weaker position if we were outside either of them.
So here we go. Now,
in Norway, but Norway's economy is the 27th largest in the world, and that's why, with you painting the worst-case scenario, people are saying this is Project Fear, and Ian Duncan-Smith and others are saying it's a dodgy dossier. How do you answer that?
Well, I answer it by asking them to present their own dossier. Tell us what the model is that they believe the European Union would negotiate with Britain. Remember, this is going to be a divorce if we decide to leave, and as with any divorce, it's likely to get messy. It'll take a long time to sort out the disentanglement of our affairs, and then we want to start renegotiating some kind of relationship with the EU going forward. And the fact is...
Thank you. President Obama came and made a fairly strong intervention to remain in Europe for the UK. How do you think he did, and did he have any right to do it?
I think he did very well, and of course he has a right to do it. I mean, he's the President of the United States. It's the most powerful country in the world. It's Britain's biggest single ally as a country. It's right, at least, that we in Britain know what he thinks about it. And it would be odd if he didn't think something about it, since it's such a huge decision for Britain. He expressed what he really thinks, and I've talked about it with him. This is what he believes.
I mean, one of the things about the whole idea of getting out of Europe, Brexit, is that there's so much uncertainty. The Leave campaigners say we could negotiate all the deals that we have now with individual nations. But the president put paid to that argument. He basically said Britain would have to stand at the back of the queue, he said, using a British ism. He also said this.
The UK would not be able to negotiate something with the United States faster than the EU. We wouldn't abandon our efforts to negotiate a trade deal with our largest trading partner, the European market, but rather it could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, before we were able to actually get something done.
So the Brexiters, led by Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, they're all crying foul, that the president is exaggerating, that that's nonsense. How important is what the president said on trade?
It's important, and people will pay attention to it because they should. And it's not as if the president is telling us what we have to do. He's merely expressing his view about the consequences. And it's important we know that view. And what he says, by the way, is obvious when you think about it. Look, America's got the Trans-Pacific Trade and Investment Partnership. It's got the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. These are two huge negotiations for them. If Britain opts out of Europe, of course it's going to take time to get to a specifically British deal. And one of the things that's extraordinary about the Leave campaign is that they cry foul when you point out what are obvious facts. If Britain withdraws from Europe, it's then going to have to renegotiate its terms of entry into the single market. It's going to have to renegotiate all those regulations, all those laws. It's going to be doing it with a Europe that's obviously going to be upset with us for having left, and it's going to do it.
Polls show that remaining in the European Union is strongest among students and young people. They clearly and rightly see their future as better off in the European Union because they're the ones with the most to gain from remaining and the most to lose by leaving. From going on cultural exchanges, to opportunities to learn languages, from the choice to get funding for an apprenticeship, to studying or working abroad. Europe is their oyster, awash with opportunities. Opportunities like the Erasmus Student Exchange Programme, which has helped more than 200,000 British students study in European universities, something that would not happen if we weren't part of the European Union. So